Alright, what's going on YouTube? So this video is going to be the tier list for utility perks for Killer. Now I've already done a tier list on the slowdown perks as well as the tracking perks. If you guys have not checked that, I'll leave the links to them in the description down below. I've already made a tier list for those. So this is going to be dedicated to the utility perks. So there's only two left. There's utility and then there's also going to be lethality. So utility is going to be basically anything that doesn't fit in those other categories. It's going to be like putting status effects on the survivors, or just like, you know, doing some weird thing a little bit faster, or things that like maybe give you stealth, like things that give you bonuses and maybe things that give the survivors debuffs. Things like that are kind of going to be what fits in utility. Now, again, like the other tier list, this tier list is going to be graded solely on the utility value and nothing else, which is going to make this kind of weird because I think utility perks are generally some of the weakest perks in the game. Like if you look through this list briefly, I think these are like some of the weakest perks. I mean, obviously not all of them. There's some pretty decent perks in here, but I would say in general, utility perks are some of the weakest that you can run. I feel like a lot of these perks are perks that you run more for fun as opposed to like winning, but regardless, I'm still going to tier them based on how useful their utility is compared to each other, and that's it. If this was like an actual overall killer tier list, they would be in way different tiers. Like by the end of this video, you're going to see some things in the high tiers that aren't actually like, I don't want you guys to see some perk in like A tier and think it's a super good perk when I'm only judging it on utility, right? It might not actually be an amazing perk, like ideally. I still maybe might make a whole perk tier list where I talk about how good each perk is individually, but that might come later. So I just want to explain that. I'm also going to briefly explain what each perk does whenever I bring it up. That way you guys know what I'm talking about and know exactly what's going on. So, yeah, let's just get right to it. First off, we have Agitation. Agitation is a really interesting perk because it makes you carry survivors 18% faster. You go 18% faster while carrying a survivor, which I'm not exactly sure what your movement speed is while carrying a survivor, because I think when you're carrying a survivor, normally you, like, your tear radius goes down. Actually, wait, I see it on the Wikipedia. Yeah, apparently you go 4.34 at tier 3. So if you have Agitation tier 3 and you pick up a survivor, you go 4.34, whereas normally you go something like 3.8 or something. I don't know. Or no, 3.68 is what you normally do. So for reference, survivors are 4.0. Survivors run at 4.0 meters per second. So without Agitation, you go 3.68 meters per second, which means you're like 0.3 meters per second slower than survivors, right? So you're like a decent bit slower. They, like, if you ran in a straight line, they would outrun you. With Agitation, it's the opposite. You gain about 0.3 meters per second, so you can gain on them. So if a survivor's directly in front of you and they're close to you and you have Agitation, you can literally catch up to them while you're carrying a survivor, which is kind of nice, right? Sometimes you can get hits on people that are like being greedy and trying to like get in your way, or try to like fake like they're tanking hits even though they're not actually trying to take a hit and stuff, right? Like you can get some pretty interesting hits that way with Agitation, which is nice. On top of that, the other benefit this gives you is it makes it so that you can get to the hooks faster, which means you can get back out into the game quicker. This is kind of like an underrated part of Agitation, or at least I think it's underrated, because I think that's kind of one of the biggest benefits of it, because really at the end of the day, Killer's all about time efficiency, right? Everything you do as Killer is all about being as time efficient as possible. So the faster that you can do anything, the better, right? And carrying, like, downing a survivor and then carrying them to the hook is a pretty decent time investment, right? Like, that takes, like, you know, sometimes anywhere between, like, 10 and, like, sometimes, like, 20-some seconds, you know? That's why slugging is so powerful. That's why people slug a lot, because it's, like, it bypasses that whole process of carrying people to hooks. Well, Agitation makes that process a little bit faster. Again, it's not much, but it's a little bit faster at least, which is nice. On top of that, it also raises your tear radius by 12 meters while you're carrying people, which is pretty cool. So you get a bigger tear radius as well, which can be useful for some niche effects, right? Maybe if you're like, I don't know, using another perk that's affected by your tear radius or something, like the extra tear radius can be nice. But really the tear radius doesn't do much. Honestly, now this might be a bit of a hot take, because I know a lot of, especially like old school DBD players, they like swear up and down by Agitation. Oh, also, this might be another stupid thing to say. It's not stupid, it's stupid that I forgot it. I think the main use for Agitation is just getting to hooks, right? For instance, if you're running like a Scourge hook build or a basement build, or either or, like if you want to get to a very specific hook on a map, this will help you get there. Or if you're like worried about Sabo, or if you're worried about like, you know, people abusing spots on maps where you can't get the hooks, like if you just want to like almost guarantee that you can get the hooks, this will help you, right? You get a lot more distance because you move faster. It means that you can like carry the survivor over a lot longer of a distance before they wiggle out, because you're making that distance up faster. That's like the main use of Agitation. I kind of skipped right over that. That's like the main use of the perk. So with all that in mind, I think Agi, again, it's really hard to grade this. I need to like figure out like how I'm gonna grade it, right? Like, am I doing this based off of how much the utility helps you overall, or am I doing it how good it is compared to other utility perks? Man, this is a tough one. I think I have to do it in the way where I just grade it based on how much the utility helps you win, right? And which in that case, S tier might end up being empty. I don't know, maybe. We'll see. I think that's how I have to grade it. So Agitation, as far as like how much I think it helps you win, like again, I think it's an okay perk. I think it's solid. And this might get me some like hatred because I know a lot of old school players swear up and down about this perk, but I'm hovering around B or C tier, man. Like it's not amazing. It's not terrible. It's I'm gonna put it in B tier for now. But again, just like every tier list, at the end, I'm gonna go back and maybe rearrange things. And I might rearrange this tier list more than others because, yeah, this one's gonna be hard. But I think B tier is where it goes. It's honestly pretty solid. It has synergy with a lot of other perks. I think this is also gonna be a tier list where I talk about synergy too, because most of these perks are reliant on synergy. So I know I ignored synergy in some of the old tier lists, but this one I'm gonna be talking about them. So yeah, B tier is where it goes. Okay, up next is Blood Echo. Blood Echo is a weird one where it makes it so that when you hook a survivor, all other injured survivors suffer from hemorrhage and exhaustion for 45 seconds. But then it has a cooldown of a minute, so it can only activate once every minute. But I mean, honestly, the exhaustion and the hemorrhage last 45 seconds, so like, if you ever get into a position where everyone's injured, you can kind of keep them exhausted almost permanently, which is kind of cool, assuming they don't heal, right? If they heal, I guess it goes away. But I don't know. It's the thing about this is like, I remember when this perk first came out and like, people were like running it a lot, and people still like run it sometimes on like Legion and Plague and stuff, and they think it's good. And here's the thing. Okay, first off, it applies two status effects, hemorrhage and exhausted. Hemorrhage is a status effect that just makes you bleed more often. That's it. Like you leave pools of blood when you're injured. Hemorrhage just makes it so you leave more pools of blood. It's, in my opinion, probably the weakest overall debuff that you can apply to survivors. Don't get me wrong, it is useful. It does help you track. It's not like worthless, but it's like probably the least valuable, I would say. It's not that big of a deal. Exhaustion is obviously a much bigger deal, right? Exhaustion perks are very, very strong perks. Like completely negating somebody's dead hard can be a really, really big deal and can end a chase much, much sooner. So the exhaustion part can be a pretty big deal, but here's the thing about it, right? First off, you need to meet the conditions, which is already hard, right? You need everyone to be injured as you hook somebody, which is already like something that doesn't happen super often, right? Like that's not going to happen to you every single time you hook somebody. There's going to be very often that you're hooking people and maybe one person's injured or maybe no one else is injured and you're not really getting any value, right? But even in the hypothetical scenario where everybody's injured and then you hook a survivor and it makes them all hemorrhaged and exhausted, more likely, like more often than not, what's going to happen is you're going to find one other survivor and you're going to chase them. And while you're chasing that survivor, the other survivors are going to like reset and do gens. And what's going to happen is their exhaustion is just going to come back by the time you find them. More often than not. Again, obviously there's always niche scenarios where maybe you're snowballing like crazy, and this kind of helps continue the snowball because it makes it so they can't bail each other out with dead hard and stuff. And you know, maybe you're just getting hits and downs like wild. But honestly, if you're getting hits and downs like wild, I don't think even dead hard's going to save them. At that point, you're probably just winning the game regardless of Blood Echo or not, right? So I feel like the only time Blood Echo even like comes in handy is if you're completely dominating, and at that point you don't need it. If you're even just slightly dominating, right? Like if you're even just slightly dominating by having everybody injured and then hooking one guy and then affecting the other three, again, 2 out of those 3 survivors that are affected by exhaustion are most likely going to recover by the time you find them, and then you're going to have to deal with their exhaustion perk. I feel like it more often than not eliminates the, like, I feel like more often than not what this perk does is it eliminates the exhaustion on one injured survivor that you find and chase immediately after hooking. I feel like that's generally what it does, and that effect is just not like that great. Like it's just not that great. It's just not that good, man. And it feels like you have to jump through so many hoops. You have to meet so many requirements. Like if you want people to be exhausted, I don't know, maybe run like Fearmonger or something. You know what I mean? I don't know. There's like other perks and there's other things you can run that do like similar things. I don't know. I don't think Blood Echo is that good. I'm gonna put it in. I don't think it's useless either, though. That's the thing. It's not like F tier level of bad. I think I'm gonna put it in T tier. I don't think it's good, but I think it's generally overall a bad perk. But I think there are times where you can get some decent value out of it. It's very rare that you're gonna get like super good value, but it will happen here and there. So yeah, I think D tier is where it belongs. Okay, Dark Devotion. Dark Devotion's a perk where when you hit the Obsession with a basic attack, it has to be a basic attack. If you hit the Obsession with a basic attack, you give them... by the way, this is like one of my favorite perks. You give them a tear radius. They get a 32-meter tear radius for 30 seconds, and you gain undetectable for that 30 seconds. So it's kind of like you transfer your tear radius to them, but... it's not really like that because their tear radius is just a static 32 meters no matter what, right? Like if you're a killer that doesn't have a 32-meter tear radius and you hit them, you still give them a 32, right? Like things that affect your tear radius that don't affect theirs, it's always 32. But basically when you hit the Obsession with a basic attack, they gain a 32-meter tear radius and you lose your tear radius. So this is like a major like misdirection perk. It's honestly one of my favorite perks in this entire game. I think it's so fun to play with. That being said, if we're going to talk about how actually, okay, if this was a fun tier list, this would be S tier by miles. If this was solely based on fun, this is like my go-to fuck around, have fun perk. Honestly, I love it. But if we're gonna talk about effectiveness, it is interesting. I actually think this perk can be really effective on killers, especially killers that people don't expect to be stealthy, and especially when they're dangerous close range. People like Bubba. I think Bubba's a really good example of a perk that uses a killer that uses as well, right? People expect Bubba to have a tear radius, and also if Bubba sneaks up on you, he has a motherfucking chainsaw, you know? So that's not who you want to sneak up on, or who you want to be snuck up on by. Like he can one-shot down you if he gets close to you. So it actually can be really useful, and here's something that I think also makes this useful too. If you're able to down the survivor with the basic attack that activates Dark Devotion, then you can basically make the tear radius stationary. So you can know exactly where the tear radius is. And this is useful in a lot of ways, right? Because that means if you go away from that slugged survivor, you know that there's no tear radius there, so they're going to think that they're safe. And on top of that, any survivor that goes to pick up the guy that's downed is going to have to deal with a really loud tear radius, and they're going to think that you're nearby, so they might be a little bit more hesitant to pick the guy up, right? Again, assuming maybe they're not like a SEAL Team 6 that are using their comms super well. So it's a really like neat, interesting misdirection perk. I know that there's a pretty famous build with this too with Myers. I think Otz did a build on it like years ago when Otz was first like breaking into the DBD scene with Myers. It works really well on Myers too, right? If you pop tier 3 and down the Obsession, they keep your tear radius, and then you run around as tier 3 Myers with no tear radius. Like that's horrifying, right? That's fucking horrifying. So it's really good with Myers too. There's honestly a lot of good uses for this perk. Believe it or not, I really do think this is one of the more useful perks. It's just also very niche, right? Stealth perks in general are very... I don't know, like stealth can be hard countered once people realize you have it, right? Like once survivors realize you have it, whether it's individual survivors or like whether it's survivors in a group that are using comms, once they realize you have stealth perks, they become less valuable. So perks like this, even though they're good, they feel like it feels like it's kind of like a one-time use thing, right? You get like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 good plays out of it, and then survivors start to catch on, and then, you know, it gets less and less valuable as the game goes on. But that being said, you still can get some pretty good value out of it. I think I'm going to put this in... I'm thinking B or C tier. I'm hovering, like, is it as good as Agitation? Like, I don't think it's as consistent as Agitation. That's the thing. Like, I think when you... I think it's it's inconsistent. I feel like that's what it is. I feel like sometimes you use Dark Devotion and you get, like, A tier levels of value. But I feel like sometimes you use Dark Devotion and you get, like, C levels of value. Maybe even D levels of value. So I feel like the inconsistency of it, again, I'm a sucker for things that are consistent. I think if something's inconsistent, that makes it very not worth running. So I think I'm going to put it in C tier. I think C tier is where it belongs. Like, you have potential to get really good value out of it, but like you also have the potential to get almost, I shouldn't say no value, but you also have potential to get very little value out of it. I think C tier is probably where it goes. But, you know, it's tough. It's tough. This is one of my favorite perks as far as fun goes, though. If we're just talking about fun and fun alone, it's very high up there. So I'll put it in C for now. All right, Deathbound's next. This is just going straight to F tier. We've already talked about Deathbound in the tracking tier list, and I'll talk about it again here. This perk makes it so that when survivors heal each other from... Like, I'm not even going to pull up the actual official description because it's just ridiculous. It's like, if one survivor heals another survivor, and it's more than 36 or 32 meters away from you or something like that, it's like a decent distance away. It has to be more than like 30-some meters away, and then one survivor has to heal another. It can't be a survivor healing themselves. It has to be one of them healing another. If that happens, they scream, and then if the survivor that healed the other one, if they leave a certain like close proximity of that survivor, they become oblivious for the next like 60 seconds. It's like... such a weird perk. Like it's again, it's kind of like Blood Echo in terms of like you have to like jump through all these hoops, except the hoops are so much more. Like it's so odd. And on top of that, like the screaming isn't even very good tracking, which I know we're not talking about the tracking, so I guess I shouldn't even bring up the whole screaming thing, but like the screaming isn't even that good of tracking, and the oblivious status effect is really not that big of a deal, right? Like once a survivor knows they're oblivious, like they can kind of just position well. Oblivious is cool and all, but it's really hard to like, it's hard to take advantage of oblivious. Does that make sense? Like it's hard to like know where an oblivious survivor is and take full advantage. Like I know that they scream or whatever, so you have like at least a decent idea of where they are, but even then, like if they're a smart survivor, they'll just position well. That way, if you try to sneak up on them in the next like 20 seconds, they'll just be in a good spot to take care of it, and then you're fucked, right? And on top of that, just in general, I think Oblivious is one of the weakest effects to put on people because you don't know who's oblivious. It's hard to know exactly who's oblivious and where, so it's hard to really get the value out of it. It feels like a lot of the times when you're making people oblivious, you're just hoping to randomly get value without really trying, right? It kind of feels like that's what ends up happening. So the effect that it gives them is not very much. You can avoid the effect entirely by just sticking close to the guy that you healed. Also, to even get the effect at all, you have to like do a very specific thing, which is heal another survivor outside of like a certain radius of the killer. It's just all so ridiculous. It's all so ridiculous just to get you such a little effect. It's a horrible perk. Don't ever run Deathbound. It's an awful perk. All right, up next is Distressing. I don't actually know if anything's going to go in honorary mention this time around, by the way. I put it here, but I don't know if anything's going to actually go there. Distressing is a perk that just makes your tear radius bigger. That's all it does. It makes your tear radius bigger, and it gives you a little bit more deviousness points, is all it does. And, like, it's hard to judge this because, obviously, like, you're only going to run I shouldn't say only, but you're pretty much only going to run Distressing if you're combining it with other perks that, like give you effects based off your tear radius, right? Like things like Unnerving Presence and stuff. But I really don't even think this is like worth the perk slot in that case. Like it's really hard to justify using a perk slot on Distressing. Like you can do it, but I feel like if you're gonna do stuff like that, you usually want to increase your tear radius through like add-ons and stuff, you know? Like maybe calm add-ons for Doctor or like Dead Rabbit for Myers or something. Like it's hard to justify running a perk slot for Distressing. You can do it, but it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's very often not worth it. Just FYI, though, it does increase the tear radius by 26%, which is a decent amount, right? Like, that's basically 25%. So if we think about it that way, it's like a fourth of a tear radius. Say your tear radius is, what, 32 meters? That's basically... So, like, a fourth of that would be, what, like 8? So it would make your tear radius basically, like, 40 meters instead of 32. It adds, like, 8 meters of tear radius, which is honestly, like, really, that's a decent effect, right? That's an 8-meter radius. So it's 8 meters on all sides of you. So it's like a 16-meter diameter. You know what I mean? It's a pretty decent chunk of space. I mean, I guess if you're really fully committing to like a build like with like Colorophobia or Unnerving Presence or some build where like them being in your tear radius is super, super important, then it could be useful. But it's just, I feel like even then, a lot of the times you would probably get more value out of other perks, right? Like you can probably still replace Distressing with like something else that's going to get a lot more value. So I think I'm going to put it in D tier. I don't think it's like quite bad enough to be F tier, but I also don't think it's good enough to justify C tier. I think that it's around D tier. It's okay. Like there's some uses for it, but it's not great. It's, you know, D tier it is. All right, Force Penance is next. This is kind of a cool perk that they added with Pyramid Head. And this perk makes it so that when someone takes a protection hit, they get broken for 90 seconds. That's all it does. So if anyone takes a protection hit, whether it's you carrying a survivor and then like tanking a hit, or whether someone like tries to body block a hit for someone that's injured, or honestly, even if somebody just takes a hit anywhere close to someone that's injured, like honestly, when you run this perk, sometimes you'll find that you get the effect of it like accidentally. Like someone can just be like within the same tile of somebody that's injured and it'll count as a protection hit, and then you'll get the effect, which is kind of neat. So broken, if you guys don't know, is an effect that makes it so they can't be healed. So basically, if somebody like takes a hit for somebody else while you're running this perk, they become injured and they have to stay injured for at least 90 seconds before they can even begin to heal. So it's kind of nifty for keeping people injured. There's like, again, there's certain like niche builds and like niche playstyles where this can come in really handy, but it's also very reliant on the survivors playing a certain way. Maybe if like maybe if you're running like a build or like a killer where the #1 counterplay to you is taking hits for each other, then this could be really useful. As a matter of fact, if you guys watched my competitive tournaments that I hosted on my channel, if you go back into like, I actually have a playlist of competitive tournaments that I've casted. We've done a couple. If you go to any of the Twins games, you almost always see this perk ran on Twins in comp. Because with Twins, at least in competitive, it's very, very, very like meta to take hits for each other, right? It's like kind of like how it's played. Like everyone takes hits for each other. Everyone like uses like a buddy system to take hits, and then they try to like heal up and reset, and they're like very organized in how they play. And it's really useful there, right? Like it's literally ran out of one of their 4 perks, which is insane if like thinking about like a tournament and running Force Penance, but it really is that good. But that again, that is only when the survivors are playing in a very specific way, and you know that they're going to play that way. That's kind of the thing. It's very hard to like even guess how survivors are going to play when you go into a game. Like you have no idea if the survivors that you go against are just going to like leave each other out to dry and just slam gens, or if they're going to be taking hits 24/7. Like there's really no way for you to know. If you do get survivors that are like taking hits for each other very often, this could be really good, right? Especially if they're doing it with boons. Like, I know one thing that people hate is when people have boons up and then they're constantly taking hits for each other, and you can't really, like, you're, like, not even really punishing it because they can just run away and heal so easily. So if that's something that you find frustrating, then Force Penance could be for you. It really could be for you. And again, considering boons are so meta right now, I'm almost inclined to put this a little bit higher than I normally would. And maybe I will. Perhaps I will. I think I'm going to put Force Penance in C tier. I think that's where it goes. I was thinking D tier, but I think it's a little bit better, right? I think you get a little bit more consistent value out of this than you do something like Blood Echo and Distressing. Again, it's just like Dark Devotion. It's a bit inconsistent. When you do get good value out of it, the value can be really, really nice, but it's just not, you're not going to get consistent value. So it's not quite going to like push up into these tiers, but I think C tier is a pretty good place for it. I think that's right around where it belongs. Franklin's Demise is up next. This perk makes it so you knock the item out of the survivor's hand whenever you hit them, and then the item also slowly loses its charges on the ground. Is it even slowly? Hold on. Oh, the wiki actually doesn't say how fast it loses its charges. I don't know. I actually have no idea how fast it loses its charges. It feels like it's like decently fast. Like it's definitely pretty priority, right? Like if you knock a flashlight out of someone's hand, they kind of need to go back and get that bad boy pretty soon. Otherwise, it's going to lose all of its charges. So this is like an anti-item perk. It makes it so that if you hate the items the survivors have, you can knock them out of their hands, and they'll slowly lose charges on the ground. And even if they go back and pick them up, they kind of have to go out of their way to go back and pick them up, which is a big time waste. As much as I hate to do this, and I really do hate to do this, I think I gotta put Franklin's in A tier. Franklin's is actually a pretty good perk, especially considering how strong items are, right? Like medkits in particular. Flashlights are, I would argue if you're putting on Franklin's Demise to deal with flashlights, then I think you're fucking up, personally. I don't think you need Franklin's Demise to deal with flashlights. I personally think flashlights are really easy to deal with as on the killer side, especially if you're like fully paying attention to who has them and where they are. I think it's really easy to avoid being flashlight saved. As a matter of fact, you can even bait people that have flashlights into getting themselves killed a lot of the times because you can just bait pickups and stuff. But so if you're using this to avoid flashlights, then like, bro, that's F tier. But I think like for the sake of like things like medkits, it can be really, really good, honestly. Like medkits are insanely good right now. And even toolboxes too. I'd even argue the same thing about toolboxes. Toolboxes are pretty strong as well. So just being able to basically negate the items that the survivors have can be a very, very big deal. Like if you ever see a lobby with 4 medkits, it would absolutely not be crazy at all to slap on Franklin's, because like fuck that. That sounds miserable, you know? So I really think you can get good, consistent value out of this, right? I think this perk, again, the only time you wouldn't get value out of this is if the survivors just have no items. But if you're bringing this perk in when the survivors have no items in the lobby, then like that's on you, dog. You know, that's on you. What the fuck are you even doing? Like, hello, pay attention. So yeah, A tier it goes. I think it counters items. Items are really strong, and pretty simple explanation. A tier it goes. Furtive Chase is the next one. This one's going straight into F tier. Why the fuck does this perk exist? Literally, why does this perk exist, dude? This is such a weird perk. Okay, this perk makes it so that when you hook the obsession, you gain a token. And each token that you can get up to 4 of them. Okay, you get a token and they can stack up to 4 times. For every token you have, your tear radius decreases by 4 meters while you're in a chase, but only while you're in a chase. Okay, also when a survivor unhooks the obsession, they become the new obsession. So like it kind of makes it like an anti-tunnel, but also like it's like a weird like obsession swap. It kind of like makes you not want to tunnel because you want to hook the obsession to get more stacks type thing. It's like kind of a weird thing like that, right? But here's the thing, like the tokens, like what they do sucks. Like even if you get 4 tokens, that's what, minus 16 meter tear radius in a chase. The thing about it though is that when a survivor is being chased by you, they have chase music. So this doesn't even actually do anything for the person you're chasing. Like the person you're chasing is still going to hear the chase music. They're still going to know that they're being chased. It's not going to change anything for them, pretty much, right? It might change like a very subtle sound in the background of like the heartbeat. Maybe if like someone really, really heavily pays attention to the heartbeat, it might mess them up slightly. But that's really it. Like the only time that this would really be useful is if you're like chasing a survivor and then like breaking off of chase and like going to check on a gen or something that someone's working on, and then you maybe like sneak up on them because your tear radius is like slightly smaller or something. Like it's just weird. I don't know. It's very odd. I don't really get it. Like maybe if they made it so that it reduced your tear radius by like literally like 28 or something at maximum stacks, that way your tear radius was like 4 meters at max stacks for most killers, then maybe it would be, even then it would probably still be bad, but at least it would make sense. Because at the end of the day, if you have a standard tear radius killer, you're still gonna have a 16 meter tear radius, which is still a decent bit, right? So I just like, I don't get the point. I don't get the point. You go through all the, again, you have to do all the specific shit, right? You got to hook the obsession. You can't hook anybody else. You have to make sure you hook the obsession to get these stacks, and you have to gain stacks as the match goes on, right? Like by the time you get the 4 stacks, there's probably already like a couple gens done. And then what? You get like this weak ass effect that does nothing. I don't know. This perk is right down there with Deathbound in like the tier of like, why the fuck would you ever run this? Like, why would you ever run either one of these perks? Like, what are you doing? What are you actually even doing with your life? Please put those away. Don't bother. Okay, now that I got that out of my system, let's go to Plaything. Plaything is now this is funny because I'm actually gonna rate Plaything kind of low. Plaything is a perk that makes it so that every time you hook a survivor for the very first time, if there's a doll totem, if there's at least one doll totem on the map, it will become that person's Plaything totem, and they will be oblivious for as long as that totem remains active. So it kind of like assigns them a totem that's their Plaything totem. They have to break it or else they stay oblivious. There's also like this added effect as well where the totem is blocked for a set amount of time to everybody except for the person who it's tied to. So it's not like their teammate can cleanse it for them while they're on the hook. Like there's a set amount of time where only they can cleanse it, and then after that it goes away. Also, the survivor that is affected by it can also see the radius up to 16 meters. So it's like kind of easy to find. Like not easy, but it's relatively easy to find. Basically, it just makes survivors oblivious. It's essentially what the perk, as far as what the utility of it is, right? It makes survivors oblivious. Now, this is a perk that I think is actually a pretty okay perk, like overall. But the reason why I think it's okay is because of the slowdown effect, right? I think the slowdown effect of this perk is nice. The fact that every survivor that you hook has like this incentive to want to go chase down a totem is pretty nice, right? Like it's pretty nice. It gets them off of gens, ideally, right? If they actually deal with it, it gets them off of gens and it makes them, you know, go do something else, which is a good time waster. But if we're talking about solely utility, again, we talked about this with, what did we talk about this with? Deathbound? We talked about this with Deathbound when we talked about Oblivious. I really don't think Oblivious is that good. Because here's what happens when you run things like Plaything. You like hook a bunch of different people multiple times, right? And then you hear a couple totems get broken, you know? Like you hook maybe 2-3 survivors, and then you hear a totem get broken across the map. You have no idea whose totem that is, right? Like you have no idea who is now no longer oblivious and who is still oblivious. You don't know where the people that are oblivious are. It's like, again, it's nice, right? Having all the survivors affected by oblivious is nice, but it's not really like you can use that to consistently get insane value, right? Like it's still very random. Like you will get really good value randomly, right? Like that will happen decently often, but it's not like consistent, right? Like you just have to like, you're like, hey, well, people are oblivious now. Maybe they'll randomly run into me, or maybe they'll position badly without realizing it, you know? And you kind of just have to pray that that happens. There's really no way for you to actively make it happen, you know? So I don't know. Again, I think overall it's an okay perk, but if we're talking strictly utility, I think it's going in D tier. I just don't think Oblivious is that. It's better than Bloodhound, or sorry, Bloodhound. It's better than Deathbound at least, but it's not, I don't think it's C tier level. I think it goes in about D tier. Hex Retribution's next. Why is this here? Hex Retribution. Is it because, oh, yeah, it makes people oblivious when they cleanse totems, doesn't it? Yeah, I knew that. For some reason, when I think of Retribution, 9,000 hours, by the way. For some reason, when I think of Retribution, I always just think of the aura reading. But we talked about that in the tracking tier list. So this one's just going to be the Oblivious. And again, I mean, same thing I said before. I don't think Oblivious is that strong of an effect. This just makes it so that if you cleanse any totem, you get the Oblivious effect for 45 seconds. Again, most of the time, you're not even going to know that they're Oblivious, especially if it's a dull totem. Like, you're not even going to be aware that someone's Oblivious. So, like, it's really hard to get value out of it unless it's completely random. I'm tempted to put it in F tier. So, again, if we're talking about solely... I'm putting it in F tier. If we're talking about solely utility, it's just... Oblivious is not that good, and also it's too random. It's not really... Again, the aura reading is insane. The aura reading on this perk is really, really good. If this was an overall tier list, both Retribution and Plaything would both be higher, but because we're talking about solely the utility effect, it's just, the utility is like... To me, the utility is like a side effect of this perk, whereas the main effect is actually the strong part. So, for utility purpose, F tier, it's not really that good. Undying's up next. This might be the only thing in this tier list that I think is going to go straight to S tier. It's the only thing that I think I'm confidently going to throw in S tier immediately anyway. Undying is amazing. This is a really, really good perk. This perk basically in a nutshell just makes it so that when a survivor breaks a hex, this gets broken instead for the first time, right? That's essentially what it is. Like if someone breaks the totem that isn't Undying, Undying will take that totem's place and it'll keep all the stacks and everything. It's basically like they never touched it at all. It basically guarantees that no matter what, the very first hex totem broken in a game will always be Undying as long as Undying's active. It also gives you like a passive aura reading thing too, but that's something we talked about in the tracking tier list. The utility part is solely the, you know, keeping a hex up longer, and hex perks are some of the strongest perks in the game, so this is probably one of the strongest utility effects you can have. Now unfortunately right now we live in boon world, so it's really hard to keep hexes up right now just because of how popular boons are and how much people know of totem spawns now. So even when you run things like Ruin Undying, it's kind of hard to keep it up for very long. But still, like the fact that it keeps it up for longer is really good, right? The longer Ruin stays up, the better. And you can say the same thing about other perks, right? Too, right? Like look at like Devour Hope. Like Undying Devour Hope is an insane combo. Like if they don't realize that you have it until you get the 3 stacks, and then they have to hunt down 2 different totems, like that is brutal, dude. Like that's basically game over at that point. Like if you get the 3 stacks of Devour while still having it and Undying, that's practically GG. Like that's honestly GG at that point. The game's over. So you get some insane combos with this. Again, hexes are just already so strong. That's kind of the entire point of hexes is that they're really strong. And this just makes them even stronger. It makes them even stronger and more reliable. I think it's one of the best utility perks that you could ever run in the game. I think it's really, really good. So S tier it goes. All right, Hysteria is next. This is an interesting one. This one makes it so that when you put a survivor into a healthy state, all injured survivors will suffer from Oblivious for 30 seconds. Again, another Oblivious perk. But this one is at least much more consistent in how it activates, right? It also has a cooldown of 30 seconds, which is kind of okay because, you know, it lasts for 30 seconds. So it's like, basically, once the effect runs out, you can immediately refresh it again, right? So this is kind of weird because I think the way this works is when you hit somebody right away, I think it might affect that person. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I ran it, but I think like it's got a weird start to it. But again, at the end of the day, it refreshes every 30 seconds, which is not really that long. Like the cooldown is pretty low. It refreshes pretty often. And this is actually like, as far as the Oblivious perks go, this is honestly probably the best, right? Especially if you're playing a killer that's spreading damage a lot, right? Like if you're spreading a lot of damage and getting a lot of people injured, this then just keeps them like relatively, like it keeps them pretty consistently Oblivious, which is good, right? It's really, really good. You can combine this with things like Nurse's Calling to try to catch people out healing while they're Oblivious, which is really, really nice. The main downside of this is if survivors, again, I just feel like Oblivious is a status effect that can get countered by good positioning, right? Like if when a survivor's Oblivious, if they just maybe go to like a really safe tile that has lots of vision and then just heal there while like keeping an eye out of around their surroundings, then Oblivious just doesn't really do much, right? So again, Oblivious is a status effect that's capable of being like kind of hard countered, but not everyone's going to do that, right? A lot of people are just going to heal wherever the fuck they can and just try to get the heal done as fast as they can. And when they do stuff like that, or if they just, maybe the opposite, if they just get greedy, they don't even bother trying to heal. Like maybe they just go work on a gen while Oblivious or something, you know? If people do stuff like that, then you can take some pretty good advantage. And Hysteria, again, is one of the most consistent ways to make that happen. And it also is one of the only ways where I feel like you can actually be aware of who's oblivious, right? Like, you know who's injured, and you also can see the timer on Hysteria, right? You see like a 30-second timer ticking away, and you also know who's injured. So like, if you find an injured survivor, or if you see an injured survivor, if you see like a blood trail, or if you see somebody being healed, you'll know that they're oblivious. So like, this is one of the few times where all the other things I said about oblivious kind of go out the window, and I actually think Hysteria is pretty decent. Now, how decent is another question. To me, this is either B tier or C tier. I don't think it's good enough to be up there with Franklin's Demise. But is it? I think it's like, man, am I really going to put it above Dark Devotion and Force Penance? I might. I do think it's more consistent. I really do. I think Hysteria is a bit underrated. Like, again, it's like one of the only consistent ways to actually like use Oblivious in a way where you can almost guarantee value out of it. And I think a lot of people underrate it. I think it's actually, I'm doing it, man. I'm doing it. I'm putting it B tier. I really do. I think, like, again, these perks, my major downside with them was their inconsistency. Whereas I feel like this will at least consistently give you its effect and at least give you information about its effect, right? The only inconsistency that really comes out of Hysteria is if the survivors are just gods of positioning, then I guess you get cucked. But really, if the survivors are gods of positioning, then you're probably just going to lose the match anyway. So, you know, I guess who cares, right? So I want to put it in B tier. I think that's where it goes. Insidious. What the fuck do I do with this perk, dude? How do I tier this? Insidious is such a stupid perk. Like, okay, when people ask me pretty often, they're like, Tofu, if you can remove one perk from DBD, what would it be? And I feel like people ask me that expecting me to say stuff like Dead Hard or Noed or, you know, which don't get me wrong, I hate both of those perks. But my answer is always Insidious. Because, like, what the fuck is the point of this perk? Literally, the only thing this perk gets used for is face camping. That's literally it. So what this perk does is it just makes it so if you've been standing still for at least 2 seconds, you go undetectable for as long as you sit still. But if you move at all, you lose your undetectable. So, like, you basically gain stealth for standing still. But, again, like, there's really, like, no time that... There's never a time in a killer match where standing still is a good play. You know, there's maybe you can make an argument that there's very niche scenarios where you can try to use this to like mind game survivors. But even then, it's a massive risk because if they don't do what you think they're going to do, then you end up just wasting time standing still and doing nothing. You know, I actually made a video about this a long time ago, back when I was very first uploading on YouTube. If you want to, if someone cared enough to like look up OhTofu Insidious, you might be able to find it. But I made a video where I tried to get Insidious value outside of camping, and it was fucking hard. It was like borderline impossible. This perk is basically just a camping perk. But that being said, it sadly works kind of well, right? Like, I bet you if you go play like Bubba with Insidious and just like camp people with Insidious, especially if you put yourself in like a relatively hidden spot, you'll probably get a decent amount of kills, right? And like probably a decent amount of like 4Ks, as sad as it is. It's stupid. I don't really know like where to put this. I really don't, because it's so like easily countered by the survivors just ignoring the unhook and doing gens. But like, I don't know. It makes them at least have to scout it out first. Dude, I'm putting it in C tier. I don't know, man. I'm putting it in C tier. I have no idea where the fuck to put this thing, dude. It's so odd. It's such a weird perk. It also feels like it's like, I'm not really one to bring like Survive with Friends talks up much, but this is a huge like Survive with Friends difference maker, right? Like if it's a bunch of solo players, then it's probably like A or B tier, because that means like, I'm not saying necessarily that like solo players are guaranteed going to walk up and eat the chainsaw from a Bubba, but at least in that case, every survivor would have to at least walk up and be like, oh, he's Insidious camping, and then leave to do gens, right? Whereas like if you're in comms with people, all it takes is one person to see it, or the person on the hook to be like, hey, by the way, he's Insidious camping, and then everybody knows to stay on gens, right? So there isn't that like big time waste of everybody having to walk up, because it might not seem like that big of a deal, but like when someone's face camping someone to death, you know, especially like a Bubba, that's like, you have 2 minutes, dude. You have 2 minutes until that guy dies, and you got to get as much gen progress as you can done in those 2 minutes, because after that, it's a 3v1, you know, and it just gets harder and harder from there. So that little bit of time waste that they take to like scout it out is actually bad. Like it's actually like, it's rough, you know, like that's actually very rough. So like, it's hard to judge, man. I'm just going to put it in C tier just because I don't really know where to put it, right? If you're against like a bunch of solo queue gamers that all have to scout it out individually, you know, maybe it's like a B tier. if you're against like a Survive with Friends, it's probably like an F tier, D tier, F tier. You know what? I'm gonna put it in D tier just because I don't want people to run it. Maybe it should be in C tier. Maybe it should be in D tier. Like, I'm hovering between C and D, but I'm going to put it in D just because I don't want anyone to see this thing, like, even remotely high on a tier list, because fuck this perk. It just shouldn't exist. A perk based around camping hooks just shouldn't exist. It's stupid. It's horrible. It creates unfun gameplay scenarios. And I'm not even necessarily saying that camping hooks is bad or whatever, right? Like, you can make the argument that it's a strategy, and, you know, that's a whole other discussion we can have another day. But in my opinion, I don't think they should have a perk that encourages it this heavily, especially when killers like Bubba exist. So yeah, I'm putting it in a D tier. Fuck this perk is all I'll say. Fuck this perk. Next is Iron Grasp. Iron Grasp is like Agitation's like shittier cousin, I guess. This perk makes it so that when you're carrying a survivor, it makes them, it takes longer for them to wiggle out. And on top of that, you gain more control. Like when you have someone on a shoulder and they wiggle, it kind of like moves you side to side. And especially if they're running Boil Over, right? If they're running the perk Boil Over, you really go side to side. Like, you sway heavily. So yeah, it can help with that, right? It helps you like not sway as much, which is honestly pretty nice if they have Boil Over. But even if they don't have Boil Over, I guess it's okay. And it also helps you carry them a little bit further, right? Just like Agitation, it helps you carry them further, so like you can get the hooks that you maybe normally couldn't get to. But here's the thing. Based on the math, you can actually, like, if you pick up a survivor and then you carry them the max distance that you can before they wiggle out, you actually get further with Agitation than you do Iron Grasp. So if you have the choice of only running one, Iron Grasp is usually better, right? Usually. Although, if survivors are body blocking and taking hits, that makes Iron Grasp better, because the extra speed you get from Agitation doesn't matter if you're stationary from hitting survivors, right? So, like, Iron Grasp is really good if you're expecting body blocks. Agitation is much better if you're not expecting body blocks. And I would say Agitation's a lot better most of the time. Agitation also has the extra benefit of like getting you to hooks faster and stuff too, which is like, you know, again, like kind of, you know, decent. So again, it's like a weaker version of Agitation. I feel like if you want to run one or the other, you should almost always go with Agitation instead of Iron Grasp. Again, unless you're terrified of body blocks. And if you're terrified of body blocks, I have another perk coming up for you soon. I have another perk coming up for you real soon, okay? Keep an eye out. So, yeah, Iron Grasp doesn't really... Again, the effect is okay, though. Like, if I'm trying to base it objectively on the effect, I'll put it in C tier. Because, again, being able to make it to hooks is nice, especially now that Scourge hooks are so popular. You know, being able to guarantee that you make it to a hook is pretty cool. You know, pretty cool. I'm down with it. I think it's okay. I think it's about a C tier type value. So that's where it goes. Okay, and next we have Iron Maiden. This is a weird, like, this is another one of those ones where I'm like, wait, why was it here again? But then I remembered. So Iron Maiden is like, this perk is in like pretty much every tier list. I think this is going to be in like 3 out of the 4 tier lists because it just does so much. I mean, I guess it doesn't do a lot, but it fits a lot of different categories. So what this perk does is it makes it so that you check lockers 50% faster. And if someone's in a locker and they jump out, they scream, like revealing their position, and they also become exposed for, I think it's like 30 or 60 seconds. It doesn't really matter what the exposed is. They're exposed for a set amount of time, but this isn't really about the exposed, and it's not about the screaming either. What this is about for this tier list is the fact that you check lockers faster. That's literally the utility this gives you. But, which might sound silly, right? Like, oh, you check lockers faster. Cool. But you might not realize, or a lot of you probably do realize, that this also affects Huntress and Trickster, who reload in lockers. So, like, when you reload to get your power with Huntress or Trickster, you can do it a lot faster, which is actually kind of a big deal. Because that's kind of one of the major downsides of those killers. It's like, they're very slow and they're very lethal, but they're lethal for a set amount of time before they have to, like, you know, scamper away with their tail between their legs and get their power back. So it kind of makes that, like, interaction quicker, and it kind of gets you back into the game quicker. So, again, I'm judging it based off of that, as well as just maybe the general idea of checking lockers faster, which can be useful sometimes. And honestly, I think as a Huntress Trickster perk, I might go as high as B tier with this. I really might. Again, solely for those 2 killers. Hypothetically, if we were saying about how this affects the general killer, like the whole roster, I would probably say like D tier, right? But like, again, who the fuck is running this on random killers, I guess, unless you're trying to avoid barbecue or something. But that's more for tracking, right? If you're running this for the utility, you're running it for the utility on Yeah, it's a utility tier list. So if you're running it for the utility, you're doing it on either Huntress or Trickster. I think it goes in B tier. It goes in B tier. It's honestly pretty solid. Pretty solid. You reload faster, you can get back into the map faster, you can start chasing people faster. Again, it's not like the utility is going to be better than a lot of the other perks in other tier lists. Like, you can still get more value out of other things, but it's nice. It's honestly very, very nice. So I'm going to put it in B tier. Knockouts, the next perk. This one is a weird one too. A lot of these utility perks, again, I'm gonna be talking about Survivor Friends a lot this video, which is very uncharacteristic of me because usually I completely ignore that in most of my discussions. But like, these perks are all like, I feel like utility perks are just very heavily affected by like Survivor Friends and the ability to communicate, you know? And this is definitely like that. Knockout's a perk where if you put a survivor into the dying state with a basic attack, it has to be a basic attack, then they're affected by this perk. And it makes it so that their aura cannot be seen by any survivor that's further than 16 meters away. So normally when a survivor's down, you can see their aura like globally, right? No matter where you are, you can see their aura, so you can, know where they are, so you can go and help them or whatever. This makes it so if you down a survivor, they have to be within 16 meters to see their aura, unless they have like, this could actually be overrid by other perks though. Like if you have like Bond or Empathy, like Empathy just hard counters this. If they have Empathy, they can just see their aura at all times anyway. So it doesn't like block Empathy. But if they don't have any aura reading perks like already, then this makes it so that they have to be within 16 meters to see their aura. So you can kind of like down people and nobody will even know where they are. You know, they have to like run around and look for them. And 16 meters is not that big, so like it's honestly pretty nice. Also, for the next 15 seconds, the survivor that you downed is also affected by blindness, which means they can't see any auras, so they can't see where their teammates are, right? Like when you first down them, they don't know where their team is, so they can't like start crawling to them. And even if they could start crawling to them, it actually makes them crawl 50% slower as well for 15 seconds. So for 15 seconds, they're blind and they crawl slower. So it makes it like so they can't even really start crawling towards anybody either. They kind of just have to sit there and recover, I guess. Now, again, this is really hard to judge. Like, it's so hard to judge where this goes. Because this is another one of those perks where it's kind of like Insidious, where, like, if they're, like, hardcore communicating, this might get very little value, right? Like, if you can very easily just tell people, like, hey, I'm down. And they're like, hey, man, he has knockout. I can't see where you are. And you're like, oh, hey, I'm, like, in shack, you know? And they're like, oh, okay. And they just come over and get you, you know? Like, then all of a sudden it does basically nothing at all. But if they aren't, like, in comms, if they aren't communicating, this perk can actually be insane. So, like, where do I put it with that in mind? I think I gotta put it right around where I was gonna put Insidious, which is C tier, right? Like, it could be good. It could be. But I feel like more often than it's just a risk, right? It's a risk. It has potential to be really good, but then it also has potential to do almost nothing at all. It's just a risk. And I think that's what a lot of these perks were, right? Outside of Iron Grasp, I think a lot of these perks were like those types of perks where they could be insane, but they also have a very good chance to not be insane. So, I don't know, man. It's tough. I mean, I will say that, like, I use the shack example as an example, but not all callouts are that easy, right? Like, say you get downed on Shelter Woods, right? And you're not by shack. Like, shack is like one of the only landmarks on Shelter Woods. Maybe like the big tree in the middle too. But if you're not near one of those two landmarks, like, how the fuck do you describe where you're downed, right? You're like, hey, I'm by the tree and the rock. And they're like, oh, you mean the whole fucking map? You know what I mean? Like, it's sometimes hard to describe. I mean, maybe you can give other examples. Maybe you can be like, hey, I'm near where the hex was before we broke it, or I'm near that generator that just popped or something. Like, the callouts are not always super easy, but I feel like more often than not, you know, if you're together and you're playing with friends, you usually can figure something out. Yeah, I got to keep it in C tier. I think it just goes in C tier. I think that's all there is to it. I think C tier is where it goes. Okay, Lightborn's next. This perk makes you immune to being blind, which is pretty interesting. You just can't be blinded, ever. It also has like an extra benefit of giving you aura reading on anybody that tries to blind you, which is like, I guess, kind of cool. You know what's actually interesting? How does this work with Blast Mine? I didn't think I talked about that when I talked about the tracking tier list. Oopsie. I mean, okay, this has nothing to do with the aura reading, so I'm not too worried about it. But like, okay, I know it blocks the like blindness from track mine, but does it give you the tracking of whoever set the blast mine? Because if so, that's kind of cool. I mean, it's not really that big of a deal. I just think it's kind of cool. I don't know. I don't run Lightborn, so I don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That completely irrelevant. This is all about utility. This is all about the fact that it stops you from being blind. Now, again, like I said before, I think this is actually almost bad if they're running flashlight. I can't say that. Okay, I have mixed feelings, so just stick with me here. Okay, stick with me. Don't get mad at me yet. Let me finish my thought. this is like a double-edged sword when it comes to people running flashlights. Because I think that survivors that use flashlights and go for flashlight saves, that means that A, they're not doing gens because they're hovering and going for a flashlight save, and B, it's really easy to bait the flashlight save and like just down them and kill them. So survivors that go for flashlight saves are very often some of the easiest survivors to kill and kind of like snowball off of. So I think running a perk like Lightborn and revealing to the survivors that you have Lightborn will just make them do gens, right? Like they'll just stop going for blinds and they'll just start doing gens, which hurts you, right? You don't want them to do gens. You want them to be like hovering and going for flashlight saves that they're not going to get, you know, that benefits you. So in that way, it can be bad, but also if a survivor is going for blinds on pallets, it's fucking hilarious. It's literally one of the funniest perks ever. I think one of my favorite things to ever do with Lightborn is literally break a pallet while a survivor tries to blind you and just break the pallet. They're still trying to blind. Just walk towards them while staring directly into their flashlight and then hitting them. It's like the funniest thing ever. Like it seems like for some reason, very few survivors seem to get like that you have Lightborn. I don't know what it is about it. It's like people don't understand it for like a while. It's like they have to sit there and be like, wait, why's my blind not working? Why's my blind not working? Oh yeah, Lightborn, shit. Like it feels like it takes them a while to understand what's happening or something. I don't know. It's really funny. But that shit's hilarious. And it's also pretty useful, right? So again, it's good against that, but I would argue that if you just have good hearing, like if you just practice tracking people while being blinded, like it's really not that hard to get blinded and then keep track of someone, right? Like it's really not that hard. Maybe the hardest time that to ever do it is if they have Iron Will, right? If they have Iron Will and they blind you, then maybe it's kind of difficult. But even then, it doesn't really do that much, right? Once you're once your sight comes back, you just look for the blood and then you follow it and then you kill them. You know, like I don't think pallet blinds are really that problematic. Once you're like if you're a decent killer player, it's really not that problematic. Maybe if you're like a newer killer player and you don't want to deal with it, then maybe you can slap it on, sure. I do think it's really nice for helping against blinds that you can't really control, right? Like for instance, Blast Mine. Like Blast Mine you can't really control, right? There's no way to like stop yourself from getting blinded by a Blast Mine, but this will stop it, which is nice. So that's cool too. As far as like overall ability to kill people and how effective this is at helping you get kills, I really don't think it's effective at all. Yeah, I think I gotta put this in F tier, dude. I really do. It's weird because I get why people would run this, right? Like most of the perks in F tier, like Deathbound and like Furtive Chase, I mean, not Retribution, but Deathbound and Furtive Chase are perks where I'm like, don't ever run this. Why would you ever run this? What are you doing? If I saw someone running this, I'd be like, what are you doing? Stop it. Stop it. Someone contact your parents. What are you doing? Like, why? Like, where's your supervision? Hello, I need an adult. But with Lightborn, it's not really like that. I can get why people would run it, right? A lot of people find flashlights to be really fucking annoying. A lot of people find getting blinded to be really fucking annoying, and they just don't want to deal with it, right? Like, I get it. I get why you'd run it. So if that's like your reasoning behind it, feel free. But I do think you're giving up a perk slot for like something that you shouldn't be. Again, I don't think it's really necessary to win games ever. And I think you're pretty much always giving up a more useful perk. Like I think any one of these perks, hell, even Insidious, I think any one of these perks is going to do more towards getting you a 4K than Lightborn is, assuming you know how to play around flashlights, right? And if you don't know how to play around flashlights yet, you honestly should be trying to learn. Instead of just relying on Lightborn, you should be trying to learn. Because if you just rely on Lightborn all the time, then you're never going to learn, and you're always going to be a 3-perk Andy because you're going to be needing to have Lightborn anytime there's a single flashlight in your lobby. You know what I mean? So, again, I can see why you'd run this if you just don't feel like dealing with it, but if you're just trying to win, if you're trying to use good, effective perks, don't use it. Although, again, I also think I can also see why you'd use it for the sake of it being funny. Because, like I said, it's fucking hilarious when people try to blind you and they can't. It's really, really fucking funny. So, if you're just trying to have a good time, or if you're trying to just not deal with flashlights, feel free. If you're trying to win, don't run it. I'm repeating myself, so I'm going to move on to Mad Grit. Mad Grit is a perk that makes it so when you're carrying survivors, you can swing like with no cooldown. There's basically no cooldown in your swing. You can spam your swing like crazy while you're carrying. It's fucking hilarious. On top of that, if you actually hit somebody while you're carrying a survivor, it'll pause the survivor's wiggle meter for 3 seconds, which is basically like the entire duration of like your, you know, stall, right? Like when someone tanks a hit, it basically makes you like stop for like 3 seconds and like move really slowly or whatever. So Mad Grit will basically pause the wiggle meter for that entire amount of time. So it makes it so that tanking hits essentially does nothing for the survivor trying to wiggle, and all it does is benefit the killer, which is kind of nice, right? This is kind of right up there with like Agitation and Iron Grasp, where it's kind of a good perk if you're trying to get someone to a hook and you're worried about someone tanking hits. But that's really all it's good for, right? Like that's all it's good for. Whereas Iron Grasp and Agitation are both good for like maybe getting to a further away hook, right? Like with Mad Grit, you can't like go from like, this is not like Mad Grit's not going to get you to a farther away hook unless somebody body blocks. That's the only time this comes in handy is if someone body blocks. Iron Grasp and Agitation can come in handy no matter what, right? Like regardless. So with that in mind, it's got to be like D or F, man. It's got to be D or F. Like it relies solely on the survivors playing in a very specific way. But I guess if they do play that way, it's pretty nice. I think D tier. It's not quite as bad as the F tier perks. It can be useful. It's just very rare that it is. I would say is what it is. I mean, you can combine it with Agitation too. That's also a big thing as well. You can combine it with Agitation so that way, if people are even remotely close to you, right? Or like if someone goes for a flashlight save, right? Like we were talking about Lightborn, we were talking about flashlight saves. If somebody goes for a flashlight save, you can literally chase them down with Agitation Mad Grit because you go faster than them, right? So you can literally chase them down and hit them, and then once you hit them, it pauses the timer. Like there's some things like that where it's useful, but again, that's 2 perk slots to do that, right? Like running 2 perk slots to get that minor ass effect is just like, you know, I don't know, man. It's not very good, so it's staying in D tier. Mindbreaker's up next. This is now called Fearmonger, so it got changed. So Fearmonger, Mindbreaker, you know, I'll leave it in the timestamp as both, but on the screen you'll see it as Mindbreaker, okay? This perk makes it so that when survivors are doing a generator, they are blinded and exhausted for, I believe, 5 seconds, right? Yeah, I had to look it up. 5 seconds. 5 seconds of blindness and exhaustion, which is... Okay, so the blindness is like not really that big of a deal in terms of being like super strong. I would say it's more like annoying, you know? Like you don't like, again, outside of, if you're running like aura perks like Bond, I guess it's like a nice counter to Bond in a way. But outside of like Bond, you know, it doesn't really do a whole lot. Maybe maybe Kindred too. Maybe it's a nice counter to Kindred as well. It's kind of, okay, you know what? I take it back. The blindness is actually decently useful. It's a decent counter to both Kindred and Bond because if someone's like on a hook or like if someone's getting chased around you or whatever, you can't really see where your teammates are near you or really at all. So you don't really have any information. It kind of takes that information away. But if you're not running either one of those perks, it doesn't really do much, right? It can maybe hide the aura of like where somebody got downed if they got slugged, or maybe like a hooked survivor. But even when a survivor gets hooked, there's like a big bubble that shows up. So you still can have a general idea of where they are. I think the main benefit of this is the exhaustion more than the blindness. Again, the blindness is not terrible, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's the main benefit. I think most people run this perk to make people exhausted, right? It kind of prevents people from sitting on gens and then sprint bursting away at the very last second. Also, it could potentially prevent a dead hard if you can down them without them walking for 5 seconds. But also, the flip side of that is, first off, I don't think sprint burst is that big of a deal. And second off, even if they have sprint burst or dead hard, it's really not that unreasonable to like get rid of 5 seconds of exhaustion mid chase, right? Especially if you're like, you know, not shy about throwing pallets, right? If you're just like willing to like pre-throw pallets and like not play super risky, it's really not that difficult to like stop running mid chase and let your exhaustion come off cooldown. Again, especially considering it's only 5 seconds. If this was something like 10 seconds instead of 5, this would be probably like a B tier perk. But because it's only 5 seconds, I don't think it's as bad as D tier, but I think I'm going to put it in C tier. I don't think it's like... Again, I think good survivors can just get around it and then still hit you with their exhaustion perk anyway and make your life miserable. And I think the blindness is like a niche thing that sometimes comes in useful, sometimes doesn't. It's good, but it's not like... I wouldn't say it's a dog shit perk, but I wouldn't say it's an amazing perk either. Some people might get mad at me for this. I know a lot of people think this perk is pretty solid. A lot of people like run this. A lot of people would probably consider this to be maybe even as high as A tier. But I don't even think it belongs in B tier, to be honest with you. I think it's... Or, I mean, does it? I mean, maybe. Now, dude, 5 seconds is just nothing. Like, it's just nothing, honestly. Like, again, I feel like if a survivor isn't good enough to walk for 5 seconds mid-chase, then they're probably not going to be good enough that you have to worry about their exhaustion anyway, right? Like, if they're not that good, then who fucking cares if they had dead hard? They probably suck, and you're probably going to be able to down them quickly regardless if they're dead hard. So, yep, I don't care. That's my opinion. Maybe it's a hot take, but I don't care. It's going on C tier. Modern Abuse. This is a perk that makes it so that when you're outside of chase, your terror radius is 8 meters smaller, and also you have a wider FOV, kind of similar to Shadowborn. But while you're in chase, your terror radius is actually 8 meters bigger, and your FOV goes back to normal. So smaller terror radius out of chase, bigger terror radius in chase. This can be really useful on certain killers. This is a hard one to judge because obviously this is only really used on killers that have like, you know, really wonky tear radiuses or things that work off their tear radiuses that can be manipulated. For instance, Myers uses this perk really, really well because when you're in tier 2, your tear radius is like 16 meters, and this like lowers it down to 8 meters, which is really, really small. And especially because he has an add-on called Dead Rabbit, which can make it go even smaller. I think those numbers are correct anyway. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what they are. So like with Myers, this has really good synergy, right? It makes you practically a stealth killer in tier 2, which is crazy. But even for killers unlike Myers, right? You can even use it for stuff like Doctor, right? Like you can play Doctor with double comm add-ons, and while you're chasing somebody and your tear radius is gigantic, you can use your static blast to have like a fucking, I don't know, like a 60 meter, you know, radius static blast. And then when your static blast is off cooldown, you're running around with a smaller tear radius outside of chase because of both comm and modern abuse. So it has a lot of synergy with a lot of different killers and a lot of different builds. And again, even just having a smaller tear radius is really nice, right? I know some people run this on Hag, even though there's not really a lot of like crazy tear radius things Hag does, but Hag only has a 24 meter tear radius, and running this turns it into a 16 meter, which is just really small, right? Like 16 meter tear radius is just really, really tiny, and by the time you hear the tear radius, she's almost already like right on top of you, which can be a pretty big deal. So I gotta say, like, Monitor is a pretty solid perk. Like, in the instances that you actually get good value out of it, the value you get is really nice and honestly really consistent. Do I go as high as A tier with this? Dude, I think I might. Man, I'm surprising myself with where I'm tiering some of these perks. Like, I don't really know, like, I didn't, like, think out this tier list beforehand. I'm kind of just winging it. And sometimes I'll, like, decide on something and I'm like, is this really what I want to do? And I think that's how I feel right now. I think, dude, yeah, I think I'm going to put it in A tier. Like, I think when you get value out of it, the value is just really nice. Like, Myers Doctor Modern Abuse value is just really, really good. Okay, Monstrous Shrine's up next. Monstrous Shrine's such a funny perk because I feel like this is such a memed on perk. I feel like this is like it's one of those perks that people joke around a lot when they talk about like useless perks. Like, it's like known as one of the worst perks in DBD. So here, we'll just say what it does. This perk is basically based around the basement hook. It makes it so that when someone gets hooked on the basement, it accelerates the sacrifice progress by 9%, which is honestly the only really like major thing it does. It makes them die 9% faster, which is honestly not bad. It also increases the self-unhook difficulty by 15%. It also increases the difficulty by 50% and the penalty by 9%. So if somebody tries to Kobe, the penalty is 9% worse, meaning they lose 9% like more of like the bar that they would lose. And also they have like a 15% less chance of getting the Kobe. So it has like two anti-Kobe benefits. But, like, who the fuck is, like, Kobeing? You know what I mean? Like, the only people that are trying to, like, pull themselves off the hook these days are people that are killing themselves on hook, you know? And in that case, you're just doing them a favor, right? You're just making it easier on them. So, really, I'm going to ignore that part, and I'm just going to focus on the 9%, right? The 9% reduced. Now, 9% is pretty close to 10%, and 10% would be 6 seconds. I think, actually, it has values here. It says that each hook state will take 55 seconds. So yeah, never mind. It has values right here on the wiki. So never mind. It says that a hook state will take 55 seconds instead of 60. So you're basically cutting 5 seconds off of each hook state. Which is like not the worst thing ever, but it's still kind of the worst thing ever, right? Because it only works if you hook them in the basement, which is like a big requirement, right? I mean, basement's like one area of the map that's not always easy to get to. So it only works if you hook them there, and also it's only 5 seconds on each hook state. It's like 10 seconds overall that they die faster, which is like, again, maybe if you're like Insidious camping someone with Bubba, maybe that extra 10 seconds is a big deal or something, but more often than not, that doesn't really play that big of a part. It doesn't really play that big of a role. Yeah, I mean, this perk's memed on for a reason. It's an F tier perk. It's just not good. Perk sucks, man. Don't ever run it. I don't know what the fuck you're doing. Maybe if you're doing Basement Bubba, but even then, you're probably better off with other things. Like, what are you doing, man? What are you doing? There's better perks out there. Come on, bruh. Come on, bruh. Nemesis is next. This perk can shift the obsession. Okay, basically what this perk does is when someone stuns you, if they stun you or if they blind you. So if they blind you with anything or if they stun you with anything, they become oblivious for 60 seconds. And also their aura is revealed to you for 4 seconds, which, I mean, if they're stunning you or blinding you, doesn't really make that big of a difference because you know exactly where they are already, right? So the aura being stupid, but I mean, it's mostly about the giving them Oblivious and also changing the Obsession. Now, I talked about the Oblivious thing already. Oblivious is not that big of a deal, especially considering if somebody just stunned you or blinded you, they're most likely right on top of you, right? Like, making them Oblivious doesn't really do much. Like, they're right there. They know where you are. The Obliviousness doesn't really matter that much, right? Like, Obliviousness is good whenever they don't think that you're after them, so they, like, think it's safe to go, like, heal or do a gen or something, but, like, if they just stun you or blind you, they clearly know where you are and they're going to be keeping an eye on you, right? So the Obliviousness is like basically non-existent here. That's not really what I'm going to be judging this on at all. If I was judging it based on only that, it would be an F tier. But I think the ability to change Obsession is actually really nice and has a lot of synergy with perks, like ones that we'll be coming up to. And the ability to kind of like dictate who your Obsession is just really, really nice. I think it comes in really handy. I think if there's ever a build where you're trying to work around Obsessions in some type of a way, Nemesis is always the go-to for it, right? But that being said, that's really all it's for, right? It's just there. I view Nemesis solely as a perk that is strictly just there to back up builds that are based around the Obsession, and that's it. Which, you know, they do exist, right? Like, I mean, Myers has an add-on where the Obsession gets stocked faster, so, like, you can combine Nemesis with, like, that add-on, and also, like, maybe, like, a Tombstone or something to get, like, really fast Tombstones. Like, there's a lot of, like, cool things you can do with Nemesis, but it's really all it is. It's like an Obsession support perk. You know what I mean? Which can be cool, but at the end of the day, it's not going to be, like, this major game-breaking perk that, like, wins you a bunch of games, right? It's not going to be, like, a major, consistent game-winning thing. It's just like a nice benefit to niche perks, or to niche builds. So with that being said, I'm gonna put it in C tier. I think it's like right in the middle, right? It's not a bad perk, but it's not gonna like do major things to carry you to win games very often. You know, it's just nice. It's just kind of nice. So C tier it is. Overwhelming Presence is next. This one's based off your terror radius. This one makes it so that any survivor that uses an item while in your terror radius will have it deplete twice as fast. Like, basically the charges will go away twice as quick. This is, like, I guess primarily used as like an anti-flashlight perk. I mean, it's not primarily used at all, is what I should say. No one really uses this perk. It's not a very good perk. But if you're gonna use it, the like most obvious the most obvious thing that you're countering with this is flashlights, right? If someone goes to blind you, they lose their charges twice as fast. But if you were trying to counter flashlights, like Lightborn exists, right? Or even like Franklin's or other things exist, right? Or again, you can just not counter them at all and let them have their flashlight charges, which I talked about earlier, which is, you know, also good. So countering flashlights I think is stupid, although I will say maybe like I'm grasping here, okay? This perk is most likely F tier. It's a dog shit perk, but I'm grasping here, okay? I'm trying to find something. Now, like, maybe if you're running a build that, like, relies on people staying injured and you don't want them to use medkits, then maybe you can run this to, like, make their medkits run out faster or something. There's never a time when this perk is good, dude. It's an F tier perk. It's dog shit. I'm sorry. It's bad. It's just bad. I want to try to justify it, but I can't justify it. It's a bad perk, dude. Making items run out twice as fast, like, it's not and it's only when you're in your terror radius, right? Like, they can just get out of. They also get a big icon that they're affected by it too, right? So like if they do have medkits or like a toolbox, they can just stop using it if they're within your terror radius and just wait until they're out of your terror radius to use it, right? It's really easy to work around. It's basically the only time that it's like consistently effective is flashlights, and again, you don't need to counter flashlights. That's why Lightborn's down here. So again, if you want to be anti-item, run Franklin's. Don't run Overwhelming. Weird perk. Don't know why it exists. Really dumb. Really bad. Kind of outdated. Should probably be updated. Not a good perk. F tier it goes. Play with Food is next. This perk is an interesting perk. It's a very, very interesting perk. This is one of the only perks in the game that can give you extra speed consistently. I think that like one of the only other killer perks that does this is like Noed and maybe like Devour at 2 stacks or whatever. Like, it's very rare to have a perk that gives you speed. But this is one of them. This perk does give you speed. It gives you extra speed per stack, which you can say maybe makes this belong in lethality. You know what? I would say that. I don't know why this perk's in this tier list. This belongs in lethality, right? Why is this here? Extra speed isn't really utility. That's kind of lethality. So yeah, this perk makes it so that if you chase the obsession and then drop the chase, you get a stack. Every stack gives you extra speed, but extra speed is, you know what? I guess extra speed can be good for mobility too. Like, maybe that's why it's here. I'm gonna throw in an honorable mention anyway, just because it's hard to it's hard to judge it based off that. It basically gives you stacking speed every time you drop the obsession or drop the chase with the obsession, but then you lose those stacks every time you do an offensive action. It's a weird perk. I'll get into this in more detail in the lethality tier list. I don't think it really belongs in this tier list. I can see why it's here, but I don't think it really belongs here, so I'm putting it there. Shadowborn. Shadowborn's next. This just increases your FOV. That's all it does. Makes your FOV bigger. Pretty nice. Pretty nice perk. On certain killers, this can be better than others. I think on killers like Nurse, this has potential to be really good because a big part of what makes Nurse hard is like keeping track of where people are while you're like literally teleporting through walls, possibly teleporting through their bodies, you know? Like being able to have a bigger FOV and being able to keep track of where the survivor is makes life a lot easier on a killer like Nurse. So again, this is one of those perks where I think it's like okay on every killer, but on certain killers it's better than others. And on those killers like Nurse and maybe like Blight, any killer that requires you to like move your camera around really frantically while also trying to keep track of survivors, this can be really solid on. But only those killers. On every other killer, it's just like mediocre. It's just like okay at best. With that in mind, I think it's gonna go into C tier. I think C tier is where it goes. Pretty good, not amazing, not bad either. Just kind of okay. I will say though, a fair warning that if you're like watching this tier list and you're trying to get information about Shadowborn, this perk is like heroin in terms of a perk. This shit is mad addictive. If you like learn a killer or if you start using this perk often and then you try to take it off, the whole game is just going to feel really weird. Everything's going to feel weird and different and off, and you're going to hate it. So if you start running Shadowborn, you're basically committing to running Shadowborn forever. You're going to be addicted for the rest of your life. So keep that in mind. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous perk to play around with, okay? But anyway, it's in C tier. I think that's where it goes in terms of strength. Third seal is next. This perk is a totem perk that makes it so that every time you basic attack a survivor... Actually, they changed this recently, didn't they? Is this still basic attacks? Is this one of the ones they changed? I know they changed some perks recently that used to work with only basic attacks to work with losing health in any way. Is this one of them? No, basic attack. No, it says basic attack or special attack. So yeah, I guess it did get changed. Okay, so now if you hit a survivor with either a basic attack or a special attack, I don't think it's a... I think it's still one of those two though. I don't know if like would this work with like plague? Like if they get sick and then they lose a health state through plague, or like if they use for the people, I don't think that would work, right? I think it still has to be you inflicting damage with your power. Maybe I don't know. The YouTube comments can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but it doesn't really matter in terms of where I'm going to tier it. But it's interesting that that's how it works, right? If you hit a survivor with either a basic attack or a special attack, they are blind. Like it just you get a stack on the perk and they become blind until the totem gets broken, right? So it's like it's a hex perk that applies blindness to people, but they can always find the hex and break it and then cure themselves of their blindness. It's not that good. It's not that good because it's a hex perk. It's a very limited time effect, and the blindness itself is not really that strong of an ability. Like it's a pretty decent ability, but it's not that insane. It can be pretty decently countered. Like blindness can be pretty somewhat countered by like good comms. And again, it's just limited. Like it's so hard to keep a hex totem up, dude. Like I talked about Undying earlier and how even when you run Ruin Undying, sometimes you lose both of them really quickly. I couldn't imagine like committing multiple totems to trying to keep third seal up. Like third seal is most likely going to get broken really, really quickly, and it's most likely not going to really add anything to your match. It's going in F tier. It's not a good perk, dude. It's not a good perk. Even when I've tried to make builds based around third seal, which I've tried to do many times, they always just fall flat. It's just never worth it, man. It's never worth it. It's just not a good perk. Tinker's up next, dude. Good old Tinky Winky. All right. This makes it so that when a generator is 70% completed, this perk will activate. You'll get a loud noise notification on the gen, and you will also become undetectable for 16 seconds. So it basically tells you when a gen's about to be finished, and then it gives you stealth. And it's like, here you go, do whatever you want with this. Maybe you can sneak up on that gen or something, who knows? So like, it's kind of like a stealth perk, and also like kind of like a tracking perk too, but again, we're only talking about the stealth here, right? Getting stealth when a gen's about to get done is pretty nice, right? You can sneak up on that gen, you can chase them off of it. If you're a chainsaw killer like Bubba, sometimes you can just straight up kill them while they're doing it. It's tough. It's tough to judge this based on solely the utility, because I think a big part of what makes this good is the like tracking part. I think the tracking is a big part of Tinker, right? Because it tells you that the gen's about to be done, which means you can maybe go kick it with Pop Goes the Weasel or Call a Brian or something, you know? Like, I think the tracking is the more important part. The stealth is nice, but like, how good is it really, you know? it's like C tier good. A lot of things are going in C tier, man, but like a lot of these perks aren't good enough. Like I feel like a B tier perk is like consistently giving you decent value. C tier perks are like sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and I feel like that's how Tinker is. You know what I mean? It's just sometimes it doesn't even fucking matter that you have it. You know what I mean? And that's how I feel. So yeah, C tier it is. I don't. People might get mad at me, but keep in mind this is not an overall killer tier list. Again, like there was the whole tracking tier list too. If it was an overall killer tier list, it might be different. But for strictly utility, C tier it is. Trail of Torment. This is actually one of the better, I think, stealth perks in the game. I like Trail of Torment a lot. Maybe. Kind of. Okay, so what Trail of Torment does is it has a pretty long cooldown. I think it's like an 80 or 90 second cooldown. I'll Google it while I'm talking. But Trail of Torment makes it so that when you kick a generator, you basically get undetectable for as long as that generator is regressing until either A, somebody stops the regression by like working on the gen, or B, if you down a survivor. I think, right? I think it's if you damage a survivor. If you damage a survivor by any means. If you do damage to a survivor by any means, then it kicks you out of stealth too. So you get stealth either until it stops regressing by either it running out of progress or a survivor tapping it, or if you do damage. Oh, and the cooldown is only 60 seconds actually. It's not as bad as I thought. 60 seconds, which is honestly not horrible. It's got a minute cooldown. The downside to this is that the generator is revealed to the survivors with a yellow glow. So it glows yellow. But here's the thing. They've added some perks recently that also do the same effect. For instance, Blast Mine will make a perk yellow. Or sorry, we'll make a gen yellow. So like if you're a survivor teammate, especially again, like if you're not in comms with your team, if you're like a solo queue teammate or something, I guess again, if you're in a survivor with friends, maybe this perk becomes a dog shit again because of this. But like if you're not sure if your teammate has Blast Mine or not, and you see a yellow gen, you know, you can definitely be on like high alert. You're like, oh, maybe that's Trail of Torment, but maybe that's just Blast Mine. Like, I don't really know for sure, right? It's hard to identify solely 100%. I think Better Together also does that too. Or wait, is it even called Better Together anymore? I don't even know. Whatever the hell that one Nancy perk is called these days, that perk also makes gens yellow. So like yellow gens doesn't always mean this perk, but I feel like it usually does, and it gives the survivors a bit of a heads up as to what's going on. But still, it's still really nice, right? Still being able, like, even if they have a heads up of what's going on, being stealthy is just really useful, right? Even if you're just straight up chasing a survivor, right? You have no tear radius. You have no tear radius and no red stain. Like the lack of red stain makes a decent difference in chase. So overall, I think it's pretty solid. I think it's a pretty solid stealth perk. I would put it up there pretty high in terms of like stealth perks that actually get you pretty good value. Man. Again, if it wasn't for the fact that it can be kind of easily countered by just good comms, again, being like, hey, Jimmy, do you have Blast Mine? And Jimmy being like, no. And then Johnny being like, oh, well, I guess Killer is stealth right now, right? Like, it's pretty easily counterable by just doing that. So, dude, I'm sorry, guys. It's going to go in C tier. I was going to put it in B tier, but I think just thinking about like how easily it's countered by just decent comms, bro, I feel like I'm just throwing everything in C tier, but I just think most utility perks are around this level of usefulness, right? Like a lot of them are just that level. I don't feel bad. That's where it belongs. So C tier it goes. And last but not least is Zanshin Tactics. This is a fucking terrible perk, dude. Does Zanshin still have a 24-meter tear radius? It's funny because this is like the killer version of Windows of Opportunity. What it does is it reveals all breakable walls, pallets, and windows. Oh, no, it is. It is. It's a 32-meter radius. It used to be 24, I think. Up to a 32-meter radius. So it basically tells you where all walls, pallets, and windows are up to a 32-meter radius around you. So you're just going to see a bunch of fucking auras around you. I don't think this is that good. I think a killer that just pays attention is already going to know generally where pallets and windows are around them. Like, maybe this could be useful if you're like new to the game and you're trying to learn where things are. But even then, I feel like it's just going to end up being distracting, you know? Like you're just going to see a bunch of auras. And then once you take the perk off and you don't see the auras anymore, you're probably not going to like recognize what the fuck you're looking at. And it's just going to be like, I don't know. I don't think this perk's good, man. I think this perk is horrible. I think this is one of the worst perks in the game. It's going to go in F tier too. There's a lot of F tier perks on the utility tier list, man. That's rough. And yeah, I mean, this looks like it, right? Let me do the thing where I take one last look and let me see if there's anything that needs to be changed. Undying is the only S tier. I think that's fine. Franklin's a moderate tier. That's cool. B tier, Agitation, Hysteria. Like Hysteria is still a little bit bold here. Like, this is a bit bold to put Hysteria in B tier. This is bold, dude. But do I really want to fill C tier with even more perks? Do I really want to do that? Do I really want more perks in C tier? I mean, I shouldn't base my decision based off that, right? Like, hypothetically, if these were all C tier level strength, then so be it. But again, I really do think it's nifty. I think it's like the most consistent way. No, yeah, I think B tier is good. I think if you wanted to argue that this doesn't belong in B tier, I wouldn't argue with you, is what I'll say. But I think it's fine. I mean, I think this all looks good for C tier. Nothing here I don't think needs to be bumped up or down. It all just looks okay. Okay, you know what? Editing Tofu's here, and I actually disagree with something I said earlier in this video, and I feel like I need to change it. So I'm going to do that real quick. I actually think that what I said about Mindbreaker is not really fully correct. Sorry, Mindbreaker is also called Fearmonger. I do think this perk is actually better than C tier. I think my argument for putting it in C tier was it only exhausts you for something like 5 seconds, and good survivors should be able to walk for 5 seconds mid-chase. And while I agree with that if the killer's weak, I think if the killer's strong, that's really not that doable, right? If you're going against like a skilled nurse player or like a skilled, I don't know, like someone who's playing a killer that's like very aggressive and strong, then walking for 5 seconds is not really no longer, it's a lot less viable. So I think I'm actually going to move Mindbreaker up. I think C tier is a little bit too low. I'm not exactly sure where to put it. Again, I feel like specifically on Nurse, this perk seems strong because Nurse suffers from dead hard so much, right? Like I almost want to put it A tier solely because of its synergy with Nurse, because I feel like Nurse gets cucked by dead hard so much, but also this stops dead hard kind of, right? Especially if you're a good nurse. Like if you're a good nurse and you stay really, really close to them, they can't really afford to walk. Like they need to get distance from you, right? So it kind of stops dead hard. But I feel like on anybody that isn't Nurse, it's not as big of a deal. Like it's still pretty okay, but it's not as big of a deal. So I think I'm just going to move it into B tier. I don't think I need to take it the whole way up to A, but if you wanted to make an argument for it being like A tier specifically on Nurse, then I can maybe see the argument. I mean, I did put Iron Maiden in B tier solely for Huntress and Trickster, so like maybe I should, honestly. You know what? I will. I'll move it into A tier solely because of Nurse. You know what? If Iron Man's going to be here solely because of Huntress and Trickster, then Mindbreaker can be there solely because of Nurse, okay? I think Nurse with Mindbreaker is nuts. That's all I'll say. Like maybe killers that aren't Nurse. There might be a couple other ones that maybe are really good too, but Nurse is the main one that I think of where like the 5 seconds is just so hard. Like it's so hard to make up that 5 seconds. You know what I mean? Like it can sometimes be difficult. So yeah, I'm gonna put that in A tier, and then I think I'm satisfied now. Yeah, this looks good. I'm happy. I'm happy with this tier list. I don't need to make any changes. I'm happy with this tier list. I'm happy with how it came out. This is the utility perk tier list. It's kind of a weird one because again, I feel like utility perks are among the weakest. There's a reason why if you go to the slowdown tier list, a lot of the perks are like an S and A tier, whereas if you look at this tier list, a lot of the perks are in like C and F tier. I feel like utility perks are just generally not the strongest types of perks in the game, you know? Like they're just not really the best. They're nice, right? They're very nice, and a lot of them are just like feel good perks, or they're just like, you know, perks that help in very niche situations, or they're just fun, which is, you know, kind of okay, right? It's okay to run things for fun, but in terms of their strength, this is a pretty accurate representation, I think. So yeah, that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this, man. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Feel free to share your thoughts. If you guys think I'm a total fucking dumbass, if you think I'm underrating a perk, if you think I'm overrating a perk, let me know. Let me know your guys' thoughts. If you guys bring up good points, maybe I'll, you know, leave a comment or, you know, like your post or something. I'd be curious to know what you guys think. If you guys like the video, feel free to give it a like. Helps a lot with the algorithm and helps a lot more people find my videos. If you guys want, feel free to subscribe to the channel because I'm uploading almost daily. And also, I'm live on Twitch 6 nights a week over at twitch.tv/OhTofu. So you guys can stop by there and say hello sometime if you'd like. And that's going to be it for me. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your night. And until next time, I will see you guys later. I'm out of here. See ya. Take care. See ya. See you later. See ya.